Yo, it's Guido coming at you with the Tactics Talk, guys, and we are going to talk today. Can we talk? I think we can. We're going to talk about the rebalance effort that's going on, and currently the update 1.20 common test rebalance effort, but also talk a little bit about balancing in general in the game, because I found the article that they put out to be very interesting in many ways. First, I'm going to start off with giving credit where credit is due to Wargaming for attempting to do at least some iterative improvements on balance. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the negative side of that, on how I feel, and at the very end, the very negative side. But we're going to start with the giving credit where credit is due and telling them thank you for at least attempting or pushing balance a little bit more than they have in the past. Unfortunately, the game is in a really sorry state in terms of balance for a couple reasons, and we'll get to those as we go. But one of them is just leaving stuff to fester for way too long. Now, we've had some fits and starts, balance attempts here and there. Oftentimes, it feels like content getting rolled out or the next Steel Hunter, Pumpkin Bash, Waffentrager, whatever event that's coming pushes it to the side, and they push those things through, and then we'll do, in some of the dead time in between all the special events, we'll get some balance thrown out there. I find that it tends to be disjointed, and it tends to aim at very odd tanks and situations. Sometimes I think they get it right. I think they get it wrong more often than not, and I don't say that necessarily in terms of what they do for the balance, although they do tend on occasion to over buff stuff. We have the prime example right here in my garage right now. We'll talk about it as we go. But I find it interesting, the tanks they choose. So often it is a tank that's doing pretty well, but it's quite often not the tank that's doing the best. And it's also often a tank that's doing poorly, but it's not often the worst tank, at least by the stats that I can see. Which begs the question then, what do they use? Well, they're going to use stats. Some people I've talked to think they use popularity a lot more than anything else. I don't know. I have zero speculation. We will look at the stats we can look at off of tanks.gg, tomato.gg, sorry, and kind of look at what they're choosing to buff and what some of the tanks around those are, and discuss, what is the deal with some of this, because I find also the verbiage quite often in their articles to be interesting, the way they say things. We'll get to that in just a minute. So, bottom line, thanks for helping, or at least looking at balance. It's something that hasn't been done. And I would say they've been on this for about 2 or 3 years now, which is good. It's a little bit more, the cycle is a little faster. It's a little more iterative. As an example, the AMX got overbuffed, but now they've debuffed it once, and they're about to do it again. Very interesting. And that's actually one of the ones that they got right, because it's still the best tier 9 and 10 from what I can tell. Tech Tree tank. We'll get to the reason I say Tech Tree tank in a minute. So that's nice, but I find the reasons odd at times, and I find when I look at the stats, I can't really figure out some of the things. So let's just take a look at this. We've got the article right here. Update 1.20 Common Test 2, Vehicle Rebalancing. I think there's some map stuff in here, but they're now showing us some of the rebalancing. All right, we are constantly working on vehicle balance now. I want to show you the next iteration. Great. Some of these rebalanced are grouped according to branches. Others will not be part of any group, but still require some updates. Okay, great. They're not final, so realize that. We'll talk about some of the numbers that they do give us here. Whether they're all of the things they're going to do or not, I couldn't tell you. But remember, as with everything, until the actual patch comes out, it's hard to tell. So, improvements to high tier vehicles. In terms of their actual characteristics, the Centurion and the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Now, I always find the way they couch these to be fascinating. It's always very much a kind of corporate speak. It's like something you would write for your boss to please them, and then to be released to the public. Which I get that that's kind of the idea of nearly any corporate writing, but it's really funny when I read it, because it's very obvious, but we'll get there. They're not very competitive in rammed in battles. Now, you could stop there. There's no reason really to say anything else. You could say they're underperforming. Maybe they wanted to have a big article and use all the different language, but I find it to be a little disingenuous, at least in my opinion. Perhaps I'm reading too much into it. I don't know, but they go on. They do not perform as well as their same tier opponents, and therefore not popular. Okay, also true. We want to enhance their combat advantages without changing their gameplay conception and key features. Both tanks will receive improvements in firepower and shooting comfort. That's a lot of words to say these two are not performing as well as other tanks, and we want to buff them. It gets worse than that. We'll get to those. Now, let's talk a little bit about balance in a game like this, and really what are we trying to get to. I am not speaking for Wargaming here. I don't know what they're trying to get to, but let's talk about a couple of things that seem to happen in player versus player MMO kind of things like this. All right. You want enough balance that you don't have clearly superior and clearly inferior vehicles. You would like people to want to play all of them. That fights against the idea that if I gave them all the same stats and they were exact same tank, then it would be perfectly balanced. Well, you don't really want that either. You could take every tank out of the game and just say tier 8 is the M454 and everyone plays that. Well, that's not a game that would last a long time. And this game is built on grinding lots of different lines, lots of different nations, all the things in tank history, all that kind of stuff. So that's really kind of a non-starter. So what are we trying to do, or what would you try to do? You want to get it balanced as much as possible so that people like to play most of the tanks. Now, the way that a lot of large games deal with this kind of idea is they constantly tweak the balance of characters or vehicles or whatever it is that their game's about. The cards, if it's a card game, that kind of stuff. In order to keep it fresh and make people sort of move around within the meta, to discover new metas, to discover new ways to play potentially, or just to change up the meta so that X tank, say the M454, is no longer the top dog. You kind of saw that with the Kranvagn, which was an extremely popular tank. They nerfed it into the ground. We'll look at its stats in a minute. That worked, fellas. I'll give you that much, because you actually stomped that thing into irrelevance. Interestingly, it was sort of irrelevant before it got the buff, and then it reigned supreme, and then it got stomped. Now, that is probably, in my opinion, too large of a movement. That is something I would try to avoid if I was looking at balance. And I know a little something about balance and gaming and creating scenarios, something I've done for 25, 30 years, basically building scenarios, war games, if you will, flying on making sure that I have objective-based training and that the scenario we've built is winnable but difficult. The same idea here. You want every tank to be usable, but you don't want it to be easy mode. And you get into those giant fluctuations like we have the Kron, and we've missed the mark on that one. I think the M454 is a similar situation right there. So bottom line, balancing, it's never going to be perfect. We're not trying to make everything even. I keep saying we as if I'm in charge or have any insight of what they're doing. I'm just saying in gaming, from what I've observed, this is what I think you would try to do. And yes, you would tweak stuff as you go in an iterative fashion so that sometimes things rose, sometimes they fell, but you would try to avoid the giant swings. Right? The giant swings. Okay, let's get into the Centurion Action X. So that's one thing they're going to buff. We'll look at the stats in a minute. We'll just read this right here and see what it comes out to if we look at the stats. This tank received improvements to reload time. I found this interesting. It's a small thing, but the format for the buffs is different in each sentence. And then this one's in parentheses. These aren't. I don't know. It's irritating. Make it just... Maybe it's me, man. It just drives me absolutely bat stuff crazy. Okay, 8 seconds instead of 8.6. All right, so it's getting buffed, as in it reloads faster. Okay, good. And dispersion during movement, which is not listed, so no numbers there. As well as on hull and turret traverse, no numbers there. Plus, its forward speed will be slightly increased from 53 to 55. Okay, that's a pretty big change. Really, 0.6 in this game is quite a lot, to be quite honest. Maybe it needs it, maybe it doesn't. A couple kilometers an hour, I'm a little happier with that in terms of small tweaks just to see what's going to happen. You know, you get to 5 or 10 and now you've got a significant change. Get to the Rheinmetall Panzerwagon. So it's going to go 9 seconds to 8 seconds. See, that's, first of all, it's opposite direction that this one was in. There's no instead. It says 2. There's no parentheses. What on earth? All right. Look, it's a small thing, but it's irritating because you have to dig through these articles to figure out what they're trying to say. And when you change things like that, it makes people look at it for a second, go, all right, what the hell am I actually looking at? I can't figure it out by glancing at it. That's a mistake. If you can't figure it out quickly by more or less glancing at it, you've failed. That's all I'm going to say on a thing like this. From 1.6 to 1.4 seconds. So aiming time, reload and aiming time. So they want to do two things, and they're going to throw both of them in there. All right. So that's quite a bit, actually. A second's a significant change. And aiming times, that's a fast aiming time. It started fast at 1.6. We will also improve the dispersion at 100 from 0.36. That's a huge difference. 0.3 is a lot in this game, as well as during movement and hull, and we have no numbers on those. To make those changes consistent with the parameters of the surrounding vehicles and their branches, we will also reduce the dispersion of the following tanks. Oops, we don't want to do that. The Mark 1, the Tier 8, the Mark 7/1, which is the Tier 9 British medium tank, and the Hawk 12, randomly, not the Tier 8, but the 8, or sorry, not the Tier 9, but the 8 will get something going on. None of which is talked about. Whether it shows up later, I don't think so. So, I would say in general, this is a dearth of information. Is that more or less? Whatever, it's not enough. Let me put it that way. Probably using the wrong daggum word. All right, let's go and take a look at both the Centurion and the Panzerwagen, which are two tanks that they've said need to be buffed. And let's see what the stats say. This is NA. Let's just use EU just for giggles. There's more players over there. Last 60 days, we're going to Tier 10, and we're going to look first at the Centurion. And kind of look at the numbers and say, all right, well, what are they seeing in terms of Tier 10 mediums on the Centurion? Well, if we would expect it to be at the bottom if it's getting a buff, right? I think that's pretty reasonable. So we come down here and we go, yeah, there he is, Centurion. Yep. Oh, wait a minute. Also, the 30B is below that, and the T62A is below that as well. Well, those are two vehicles, collector's vehicles. Maybe that's something to do with it. Batchat's not doing so good either. What about DPG? Where's the Centurion? Oh, third from last, but there's still two worse. That's weird. All right, frags. Oh, it moved down a little bit, but the T62A is even worse. And, all right, he's second to last on damage ratio. Kill to death, second to last. Survival, a little bit better. All right, fair enough. It's near the bottom. It's not the worst. What about the T62A? Why is he not being touched? What about the AMX 30B? Why is that not being touched? How about the CS63, which is overperforming at 948,000 battles, my friends? That's actually quite a few. Although it's in the mid, the numbers are different on EU. I always have to be careful because the tanks that are played a lot in the EU are in the millions, whereas the tanks that are being played a lot in NA are in the hundreds of thousands. So it's Leopard, Peugeot, TVP. Now, where does that put the AMX? Because that apparently is also something they look at. Well, the AX is at 6. It's somewhere in the middle, slightly below the middle right there. Some of these things are reward tanks not owned by a lot of people, so you do have to be careful about that. But the K91 is certainly not very popular as opposed to a Leopard one. Don't know. What are the things they use? It's hard to tell. Is that a candidate for a buff? Yes. Are there other candidates down there? Definitely. Are they going to get seen later? Are they still waiting out in the waiting room? Is the doctor busy? I don't know. I don't know. That's why it seems so haphazard to me. So let's look at the light tanks and see what we get out of those guys, because we're talking about the RHM, which I think most people would say is not a great Tier 10 premium or Tier 10 light tank. I kind of like it, but all right, certainly it's last in win rate. DPG last, frags last, damage ratio last. Okay, there's a very compelling argument that it needs a buff, and it's third from last, although there's only, what, 8 or so Tier 10 light tanks. So that one's pretty easy to understand why they're doing what they're doing there. Let's go to the Tier 8s, though, because they mentioned the Hawk 12. How's it doing? Well, it's down there. Okay, so win rate, it's fourth from the bottom. DPG, it is what, fifth or sixth, and here it is a little lower, but not at the bottom. Well, holy cow! Now hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. What about the poor bulldog? The basement dweller of basement dwellers. It is rare that you go across all of these stats. There you go. He got a little higher than the YOLO Lynx specialist. And he's actually up there on spotting because it's got a little bit better spotting. But sitting last in win rate, DPG, frags, damage ratio, it's rare you see a tank last on every single one of those. But good job, Bulldog. You did it. Gold star for you. You are the worst tier 8 light tank. But meanwhile, the Hawk is going to get a buff. Now, okay, it's tied into the buff with the RHM, yada yada. What about the tier 8 or the tier 9 though? Where's the tier 9 in that line? That is the RU-251. Well, he's in the middle. All right, fantastic. He is a little lower right there, third from the bottom. Doing okay, second from the bottom. Could he use a little love? Maybe. But he's kind of living in the middle right there, so that one's hard to say. Let's go back and see the next one. So those are two that we kind of look at and go, well, certainly the Centurion X, Action X could use some help. Certainly the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen could use some help. Are they the worst? Well, the Rheinmetall's kind of the worst, I would say. The Hawk 12, I don't know. There's worse out there. But the Centurion Action X, there's at least two mediums that are much worse than it that aren't being looked at. All right. Moving on. The T-57 Heavy and the Rhinoceronte. Now, see, this is the wording I'll just read it. Can compete on equal footing with other heavy tanks. Can they? Okay. Then what's the problem? But their performance can be even better. Well, yes, so could all tanks' performance. These tanks will receive slight improvements to make them feel even more confident in battle. The words that are used are pretty funny. Confident, that's probably some kind of translation thing. That is not a word that a native English speaker would use in that syntax or context. But there you go. We come over here, let's take a look. We're going to look at the T-57 and the Rhinoceronte. All right. Where do they live on this list? Let's look. Well, T-57 is definitely a candidate, and the Rhinoceronte is also a candidate. Interesting that there's a couple reward vehicles down here. We'll talk about that later. DPG, well, the IS-7, the Type 5, the Panzer 7, the DPG, the E100, the Miles, the ST. Well, there's the T-57 autoloader, right? Kind of gets a little help with that kind of stuff. Where's the Rhinoceronte? Oh, well, he's way up here. All right. What about frags? What's going on here? IS-7, Panzer 7, Type 5, got its butt kicked with an HE nerf. Seemed to affect it. E100, well, where is it? I don't know. Here. And here. Okay, got it. Damage ratio. Mouse, Type 5, E100. Now, the damage ratio is a little bit... You got to be careful with hanging your hat on damage ratio because you have a quite wide variance in hit point pools at times. So it's no surprise tanks with a lot of hit points and not necessarily massive guns or DPM. Okay, E100 does have the 750 kind of idea. So they will have a little more trouble. So you can't really hang your hat on it too much. But it's a stat that's out there, and neither one of those tanks is really that bad. Kills to death. How are we doing here? Well, gee, we're getting a theme here on the IS-7, aren't we, folks? 113, bloody heck, they're up here. All right, so what are we looking at here with the Rhinoceronte and the T-57 is they're definitely at the bottom in win rate, so they're not doing well in terms of that, and that's a pretty big outlier, 46.31%. And then if we get to the top tech tree at 52, that's 8% almost, or 8%. That's too much, right? In a game where everything lives in about, well, for win rates, you 50%, I suppose, would be roughly average or slightly below that with draws and things like that. That big of a swing between tech tree tanks, I would say, is an indicator of a problem, statistics-wise. So absolutely, needs a buff. But in terms of other stuff, there's other tanks I think that could use it, especially, say, the IS-7. So again, the question becomes, what about the IS-7? What about it? I don't know. It's a good question. Who knows? Don't know. So the T-57 and the Rinoceronte, the reverse speed is going to go to 14 for the T-57, and the aiming time for 2.9 to 2.7. I see neither one of those doing much to improve the lot of the T-57. It's a buff. It will help. I don't see it really doing that much. The Rinoceronte is only going to get from 12 to 15 backwards. Certainly on a reloading tank or auto reloading, depending on which one you're looking at right there. Being able to back and poke and back out is a big deal. That will certainly help it. Why would you go from 12 to 14 instead of 15? I don't know. All right. Moving on. Improvements to individual Tier 6 and 7 battles. The next batch of medium Tier 6 and 7 vehicles with insufficient performance also requires some updates to their characteristics. Over time, their popularity has decreased even more, so we want to revive your interest in these vehicles. Okay? By making them more competitive and effective on the battlefield. Let's just go back here real quick and look at the battles for the tanks we're talking about. The least popular in terms of tech tree is the 113, then the M5Y. I mean, the Rinoceronte is in the middle, and I think the T-57 is probably pretty popular. There it is. So right in the middle. All right, so no obvious indication there that they're unpopular. Now they are underperforming. All right. So what we're going to get then are some smaller tier stuff. Very interesting. The ARL, Tiger P, IKV, Spa Panzer. You can read the rest of those. And we'll look at those in just a minute. But then we kind of shift gears again. It's just all over the place. We got some 10s, some low tier stuff chucked in the middle. We're back to 10s. This is where it gets interesting, for me anyway. Buffs to underperforming stuff is a good idea. But the nerf thing and why is fascinating. Of these three tanks, the one that clearly needs it is the AMX MLE-54. We're going to start with that one right now. During the previous series of rebalancing changes, the Brawler received an overbuff. You're telling me, fella, in performance characteristics, which made it slightly superior. Slightly. What? This is another thing. And I get messaging and packaging and public facing and all that stuff. You look like a goof when you say stuff like that. Which made it slightly... No, it didn't make it slightly superior. It made it clearly superior. That's why you had a problem. That's why it is so clearly overperforming. That's why the stats look the way they do. And you actually, I think, just nerfed it a little. And it still was there. It was completely and utterly overbuffed. What is so hard about saying that? Bit of a rhetorical question. I know why it's hard. I know why they don't. But at the same time, I would absolutely love, and it's awesome when companies do this, and they don't do it very often, but sometimes they just say it like it is, and that would be fantastic. We screwed up. It was completely overbuffed. It's overperforming. It's clear to everybody and their dog and their mother. We're gonna nerf it. End of story. Which made it slightly superior, and it was too popular. Now this is why I brought in the number of games played kind of idea. I don't know. I don't have any inside information. It's probably part of the stats they look at, certainly. I think the Progetto, that was a thing they mentioned for the Progetto nerf from a long time ago. Guess what? It's getting nerfed again. We'll get to that in a minute. So that's where I kind of got that. Changes to the 54 affect its big gun, dispersion, reload time, and aiming time. In addition, they're going to nuke a couple of these things that are in this line. Now we'll get to the 110E3 and the Progetto in a second, but let's go take a look at the MLE-54 and see if that makes sense in terms of the stats. What's the reality here? Well, the reality is it's number one tech tree, right? And popularity, well, that's pretty dang popular, but oh, wait a minute, what about this guy? He's popular too. Quite a bit more popular, Mr. VZ, but the win rate's not up there, is it? So this thing is, in the current meta, got overtuned. It's 52% win rate. All right, that's into not necessarily close, but it's up in there. It's starting to look more like one of these things. We'll get to these in just a minute. All right. But of course, there's this dude down here. Where's the next tech tree? Well, the T57 that needs a buff. We agreed to that. 46. That was the difference I said right there. 40. That's what, 4 or 5. I think I said 8, but what is it? 6% difference. Math in public right there. That's a lot. That is a lot in this game. So makes sense to me that the M454. But let's just take a look at the. Oh yeah, geez, yep, better in the object. 260 in DPG frags. Wow. That's nice. Damage, yep. Okay. I think we can all see it, right? You see it when you see it. That thing definitely needs a nerf. There you go. What's it going to get, though? Let's find out. Nobody knows. There's no information. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. It's going to get a nerf. 2, dispersion, reload, and aiming time. The gun is really what made this thing. Always had really good armor, relatively, for the way as far as armor goes in this game. But they overtuned the gun to where it was an absolute sniper. So in the hold down meta, where you can put the front of your armor and you have good armor, that is a huge advantage currently in the current meta. All right, let's go back to the Progetto. I found this one to be interesting. The reverse speed, reduced from 23 to 20. We will also make the upper glacis plate less durable and increase dispersion during movement. You know, what happened to, where's all the historical stuff, you know? It's interesting to me when they change armor profiles. I think that would be a more useful tool for them if they were willing to do it a little bit more. I don't know why the Progetto in particular needs an upper glacis plate nerf, unless it's really dominating in some kind of hold down situations. I've not seen that. Maybe that's a top tier thing that happens over on EU that I'm not aware of. I don't know. That was an odd one to be thrown in there. The backup speed, I think, is a good one. This thing does back up fast. It's annoying when you have a hard time tracking these things down, especially if they dump their auto reloader and you're trying to chase them down and they're backing up at 23 and you're only 10, 15 kilometers an hour faster if you're in something slow. So that's good. The reverse speed is hugely important in this game. And then you're going to get some dispersion and whatnot. Now, okay, so we think the Progetto needs a debuff, needs a nerf. Well, what do the numbers say? It's not one, to be honest, that I thought about, that I went, man, if they nerf some stuff and do some rebalance, man, I hope they take care of that Progetto 65, because it's just really causing a problem. Okay. It's down here. DPG, that's it. That's the one. That's the one that's dominating. No, okay, it's frags. It's fragging everything in sight. Oh, look at that. All right. You know why it does that? Well, it's an auto reloader, so when you get towards the end of the game, the ability to close guys out, if you've maintained your votes, is pretty good. All right, so there's one. Damage ratio, that's the one. No, it's here. There's better tanks. Killed to death, near the top. Survival. Okay. Spots, probably not a big one to use, although look at the CS63. Speaking of the CS63, number 1 tech tree. Number 1 tech tree. Number 2 tech tree, only overshadowed by the Progetto for the reasons we just said. Okay, if I was to make an argument, I think the Leopard and the CS63, which are really hanging around at the top of tech tree tanks on these stats, might also be candidates for a nerf. And what about the guys we talked about down here? T62, AMX30, and of course the Centurion's being looked at. What about popularity? Well, the Leopard's the most popular. Progetto is second. Okay, fair enough. Look at that, though. Fast tank, auto reloader, auto loader, another fast tank, very accurate gun. We finally get into the object. Very interesting, my friends. Very interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's a small argument maybe for some further tunes to the Progetto, but they've already detuned it once. And it did bring it down in stats. But it's what I said earlier. What are the things they're concentrating on and why? I don't know, because that doesn't seem to be the prime offender to me right now. There's at least 2 tanks that are probably more important to be messing with than that one. 110E3. This was a real head scratcher for me. We will decrease the view range. Okay. I mean, are these things just out view ranging people? Is what on earth? And the hit point pool. All right. Makes it a little less durable. And increase the reload and aiming times. Man, that is a bunch. Like that is a huge smash to the 110E3. Now I know it's a fairly popular tank. What do the numbers say? What do the numbers say about the 110E3 premium tank? Not sorry, premium Tech Tree TD 110E3. All right, it's third. Okay. DPG. All right, fair enough. It's second. Cool. That's where the gun debuffs are going to start getting it. Frags, it's down there. All right. Damage ratio, not bad, not bad. Killed to death, it's down here. Survival, probably pretty good. No, actually, not that great compared to others. Well, what other tanks are doing well? The Minotauro, right? But you don't debuff the content you just put out. You just ignore that, right? You just like hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Also, you don't touch the old Object 268-4, which frankly was massively overtuned when it was released, was ignored for a really long time, caused all kinds of issues to the meta, got a nerf that wasn't enough. And there she sits, man, just loving life near the top. Just kind of trading spaces with the 110E3, but for some reason, the 110E3 is the one that needs to be taken care of. And it is interesting, I will say, for the Tier 10 TDs, they do swap around a lot. I think one of the biggest reasons is you have some very specifically different kinds of gameplay with your Tier 10 TDs. There are the brawlers. There are some with turrets that are kind of brawlers. There are the very glass hide kind of cannons. So you do get some definite swapping on some of these stats because of that. Now, what about popularity? Where's the 110E3? Oh, hell, it's way down here. The FV is extremely popular, the Grill A, the Sturb, but none of these three are causing huge problems. Although getting deleted by one shot in terms of gameplay, I think is a bad idea, but that's another subject and another video for another time. So why the 110E3 and not the Object or the Minotauro? I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. Certainly it's a candidate. It is overperforming, but at the same time, what about the FV 4005, who's at 47%? The difference between this and the 110E3 is like 4%. Oops. And the difference between the top one, I got to reset everything because I buffooned it. So the difference between the Minotauro at 52 and the FV at 47, and that's kind of begs another question. The 4005 is last. In terms of popularity, it's first. Because people like doing the old delete thing, even though it's not really a fantastically great tank. Which then begs the question on how important is popularity really? I don't know. I guess they don't have to buff the 4005 because plenty of people like to delete stuff and not do that good. They're perfectly happy to do that. I guess. All right. And that's pretty much the end of it. I'm not going to go through. They're also going to get caught in the frag pattern. The prototype, the T95, the Tier 9 is also overperforming, by the way. The French Heavy is well overperforming. I don't know why the AMX 65T needs another punch in the face. Let's actually do that before we leave. Come back here to Heavies and see what happened with the old 65T. Now the problem, we're going to get rid of all the premiums because it's just painful. Oops, go regular here. Boom. All right. Where's the old 65T? He got a recent buff. What did that do? Well, he was in the complete basement, and it drug him up to almost respectable. At least in terms of the rest of the Tech Tree tanks, which this is horrible. Look at the red. Oh my gosh. The problem with all these is you're going to grind them with stock stuff. That hurts them. Plus it's Tier 8. It's going to see 9s and 10s, so it's just... Tier 8 is a tough one to grind tanks and not maintain a good win rate, but the best Tech Tree, the best Tech Tree win rate at Tier 8 is the 100-01 at only 48.79, which is a good segue. So I can say basically with the AMX 65T, I don't know why. I'm assuming it's going to get a nerf. Maybe it's getting a buff. But the way the article is written, it sounds like it's going to get caught in the frag pattern and nerfed along with the tier 10 and tier 9, and I don't see it. There is zero, and I mean zero, reason or evidence or stats to support nerfing it. Maybe it's a buff. I don't know that because there's no numbers attached to that, but we'll see what happens. Back to the segue. This is a great segue to the last part I said we talk about at the end. All right, this is fine. You're working on the tech tree. The problem with that, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinion, is you are working in a vacuum amongst tech tree tanks, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic as it sinks, and completely ignoring this. Tier 8, what a great example of the absolute disaster that not touching premiums and reward tanks is in this game right now. A ship show of epic proportions. The refusal to do anything about this. You've got to get to the M4Y before you see the first tech tree. Tier 8 heavy. Look, when you put an article out and you talk about and pat yourself on the back, and to some extent rightly so because you're working on it, but you put that out and say, hey, look, guys, look, community, we are balancing our game. Here's the next step. As if this didn't exist. Now, that is one of the popular terms for today is gaslighting. Okay, I don't know if it's necessarily to that level in terms of getting into the whole, political side or whatever. I will say that it is disingenuous, at least. You're not going to accomplish your goal. There is no reason to balance your tech tree if you're going to ignore that. What is the possible reason to worry about underperforming or overperforming tech tree tanks when this kind of thing happens? Now, a couple of the things we looked at, they were tanks that were near the top, and some of the reward tanks and such weren't a factor. But at tier 8, at least on the heavies, and I would imagine, I believe as well on the medium side. Let's see how oh yeah. What a mess. The first medium at tier 8 is the UDES. Let's go to tier 10. This one's easy to see too. We're at tier 10 mediums. Well, we got the Caro, the Object 907. Even, remember the T22 was supposed to be so bad? Man, it got nerfed into the ground, man. No, it didn't. Look at it. Yes, it's a small sample size. This is where people are going to be feverishly typing and telling me about player skill and such. That's certainly part of it. But it is still overperforming, is it not? Yes, it is. Look at the Lion. Lion is now creeping back in there. It was pretty low. A very popular tank as well, just released. If we go to the heavies at tier 10, it tells it the same story. The 279 early, the Chieftain, which are the poster children, the poster boys of this entire problem. 59 and 57% win rates. Same argument here about player skill level. However, howsoever, everyone knows they are completely overtuned. An absolute disaster, but we're going to get all hot and bothered about an M454, which happens to be doing pretty well, but can't even approach within 5% win rate of the top two that won't be touched. Never mind those two. What about the 7201 and the 116 F3 and the Object 260, which are all superior? What's even funnier is the Object 780 is not even considered it's not even a good tank according to people. But here it sits with only the M454 above it, tech tree wise, in the top, easily in the top 10. It's a bad tank. No, fellas, a bad tank is a T57 heavy, Rinoceronte, SD2, IS7, Kronwagen, and 113. Right, the bottom 10. Those are bad tanks. Okay, these are actually all good tanks. I'm just saying. All right. Well, fellas, that was a lot about that one article. Wargaming, thank you for working on some balance faster than you have been. That's great. Sometimes I don't really understand your reasons. I wish your articles wouldn't be written in such a haphazard fashion. It would be nice if there was some kind of organization to them there. And sometimes, to be honest, I feel like I'm getting sunshine blown up my arse. Number 4 and A, B, C, D. Number D out of that list is, if you're not going to touch premiums and reward tanks and attempt to balance your entire game, you might as well just not even bother, because it's not doing anything. It really isn't. The games are still covered up in these completely overpowered tanks. It's not your tech tree that's the problem with your meta and the rest of the balance in the game. The game has never been this unbalanced, and it is primarily because of your reward and premium tanks. I'm just going to say it. So, I don't know what the answer is. I don't have one. There probably isn't. Based on past statements and past performance, or the way the game's been done in the past, it's not going to be fixed or looked at. So we'll just have to deal with it. So Groovy, we're going to shift the chairs around and move the tech tree tanks so that some are better and some are worse. But the upper crust, we'll just pretend that what's going on with the premiums and the reward tanks isn't there. We'll just all whistle past the graveyard as if that isn't even a problem. That's all I've got, guys. Let me know what you think down below in the comments if you got through this much of this babbling on and on right here. Good 40 minutes of yada yada. Let me know what you think. What should Wargaming do? Should they do nothing? Well, are you on the side of no, don't touch my reward tanks because I earned them? I do understand that sentiment, by the way. I get it. I do. But at the same time, I'm more interested in the health of the game overall. Maybe that train has left the station. Maybe that train was never going to come to the station. Maybe it's a non-starter. I don't know. I would love to see them, though, do something about the overtuned vehicles. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. That's all I've got. Thanks for the support of the channel. We will see ya.